The concept of gender identity has always been a straight male project. However, the impression that gender theorists would like us to have is that the so-called gender binary was the unfeminist way to look at things, while the gender spectrum is the feminist way to look at things. In reality, gender itself, whether it is presented as a spectrum or a binary, is anti-feminist. The gender binary is an old ideology tied to the church, and the gender spectrum is a new ideology tied to neoliberal capitalism. Both ideas come out of powerful, obviously male institutions, and both ideas are in direct conflict with a feminist gender abolitionist position. And this wouldn't be particularly noteworthy, except for the fact that gender identity is fast becoming something of a state religion for neoliberal countries. As with any ideology, gender identity works from the assumption that it alone can provide an uncontested access to the truth. In religious terms, this would be called speaking to God. However, arguing that the gender spectrum and gender identity is even more feminist than all that feminism that was actually done by women strikes me as particularly bizarre because the idea of gender identity was founded in such obviously suspect circumstances. This is the story we're going to tell today. Our tale of woe begins when Dr. John Money graduated from Harvard University in 1952. For all intents and purposes, he was the capitalist systems expert on intersex conditions. But it was 1952, and they were still using the term hermaphrodite, just to provide a bit of context as to what expert meant at the time. But nonetheless, with whatever expertise he had, Harvard educated, straight white male, John Money, decided to take it upon himself to surgically alter the genitals of intersex patients under the uncomfortably Nazi-like assumption that this was the most humane thing to do in the situation. That's right. Gender identity came from a privileged white dude who saw intersex children and thought, this group of people is making everyone feel uncomfortable. How can we make that go away without changing ourselves? Whether this was in the interests of the children never seems to be of concern. The broader medical community seemed to allow the violation of these children's basic human rights because by looking at the situation through what today might be called a cis-normative lens, intersex genitals were seen as essentially useless, like an appendix. Because these genitals were neither fashionable nor reproductive, the medical establishment said, what's the harm in letting this wacko carve dicks and vaginas in the mutant babies if it keeps him happy? If it keeps him out of our hair? He is the expert after all. I mean, how many almost genitals have you cut off? However, it turns out that intersex children were at least as happy not being cut up by a lunatic who had a very intense socially enabled love-hate relationship with their junk. The surgeries were not about medical need. They were about addressing the anxiety of the parents and society more broadly, as well as boosting the prestige and profit of the US medical industrial complex. As we will see, John Money was pretty good at manipulating social anxieties to his own ends. But even without this talent, as far as society was concerned, intersex babies were in need of renovation, and John Money was an exciting new developer. Essentially, using progressive rhetoric, he pioneered a new form of neoliberal eugenics as he set about gentrifying a newly discovered population for the capitalist patriarchy.